All right, with Hashem's help, we're learning today yevamos daf nun vav. We left off yesterday daf nun vav amud aleph, second line by the two dots, that the Mishnah said this whole chiddush, this whole halacha that echad hama'ara ve'echad hagoymer kana by yibum, and as the Mishnah explained, and as we learned extensively yesterday, that by all of the arayos, whether it's a mitzvah by a marriage, kicha, whether it is an isur, or God forbid an isur kares, or an isur with misas bezdin, the isur of bia begins with ha'ara'ah. However, now, my kana, when it comes to the mitzvah of yibum, and let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah said that echad oines, echad shoygig, echad mezid. Nevertheless, yibum happened, as Rashi explained, as we learned the Mishnah here, that even if there was no kavana l'shem mitzvahs yibum, he thought it's another woman, he knew it's her, but he had a mind l'shem znus, or whatever the oines meant, there was no... Yeah.
For the wall.
My kana. No, not for the walnut. My kana.
No, the animal and then...
So now, just to know, when the Gemara is asking my kana, implying, let's use the words weak. In other words, the Mishnah said, even if there was a weak bia, yibum happened. The question is it a full yibum or is it not such a full yibum? What the Gemara is referring to is a question of great debate. Most Rishonim hold that the Mishnah is not referring to ha'ara. Ha'ara is not part of this machlokes of Rav and Shmuel. Ha'ara is not called a weak yibum. That's the whole thing that we learned before. Ha'ara is called a full-fledged yibum. There are other Rishonim, based on a Yerushalmi, who don't learn the way we learned in the Bavli, that ha'ara is a full-fledged yibum, full-fledged act of bia, and they include in this machlokes of Rav and Shmuel also a case where there was only ha'ara, but that's not the way we're going to learn the Gemara. No, the Gemara is asking whether ha'ara, gemara, bia is all the same. But when the case where there was oines, shoygig, or mezid, but it was a weak case where he didn't have a mind l'shem mitzvahs yibum, even though the Mishnah said kana, what does it mean? Rav says it means kana lakoil. It was a proper yibum. Shmuel says not, nish genoi. Loi kana ela ledvarim ha'amurim b'parsha. She's a yevama, they're married, but they're married only as far as the explicit laws that are written in the Torah are concerned. And what are they? Number one, lirash b'nichsei aviv, that the brother who chose to do yibum, he is the only heir of his deceased brother's belongings, estate. That happens even though there was a weak bia, and also lepatra min yibum, that from now on none of the other brothers can choose to do yibum with her. They're married, and furthermore, if he doesn't want to be with her, he has to give her a get, and even more than that, and not a chalitza. Yibum happened, but what not? The way Rashi talks out, what not is that if this family, the deceased brother, the new brother, the kahana, she's a bas Yisrael. And as we learned before, that a bas Yisrael, when she marries a kohen, and let's talk this out right now, mido'iraisa, when she's engaged to the kohen, she can eat truma. If he dies without leaving children, she no longer can eat truma. Yibum is a case where he died without leaving children.
And if he has children,
then she can continue to eat children because the children allow her to eat truma. So let's go back over here. That what not Shmuel? Yeah, so what is Shmuel speaking about? That the husband, Reuven and Shimon, Reuven was a kohen. Reuven married Rachel. Reuven died. When the Mishnah says that Kana says Shmuel, yeah, Kana, but she cannot eat truma. She will only be allowed to eat truma when he will later have a bia with her as a husband and wife, l'shem marriage. And she will not be allowed to eat truma. I just want to point out now, it's going to be important for today's sugya, that midrabanan, we'll learn this in Masechtas Ksubas, a arusa to a kohen cannot eat truma. And really the Gemara in Ksubas gives two reasons. One reason is because since she's still living in her father's home, if she's going to take truma there, she might give that truma to her family, and her family is a family of Yisraelim. They're Zarim, Big Yisr, they might eat truma. And the other reason there is called simpoin. Simpoin meant, we'll learn that there, is that when a man will do nesuyin with his wife, especially after Rav's prohibition of doing kiddushin bebia. So normally by a kiddushin there's no act of intimacy yet. Theoretically it's possible that a man is going to find such a blemish in his wife that he's going to claim that had I known that she's so blemished I never would have married her. Sometimes that claim is acceptable, and when it is acceptable it retroactively nullifies the kiddushin. It's a mekach tos. And if she will be eating truma during her period of engagement, it might come out that retroactively she was a zara that ate truma. Okay, so coming back over here. So that's according to Shmuel, what a weak bia does not accomplish, she will not be allowed to eat truma. And now there are two versions clarifying the machlekes Rav and Shmuel. So says the Gemara like this: Min hanasuyim, if this widow was originally married, full-fledged married to Reuven, she had nasuyin with Reuven, then ledivrei hakoil, even according to Shmuel, if Reuven dies, she's a widow from nisuyin, and even if Shimon did a week bia with her, she can go back to eating truma. Oichla, why is that? Because since she was eating, even midrabanan eating when she was married to Reuven, tahavi ka'achla meikara. Pligi, where do we have a machlekes between Rav and Shmuel? If she was only connected to Reuven, to the deceased brother, only mino erusin. And as we said before, that then midrabanan she was not allowed to eat, so she wasn't eating. And now the husband dies, and now the new husband, the yavam, does a week bia with her. Shmuel says she can't eat truma yet. Rav says no, that even here oicheles. Why? Because since the Rabbi Rachmana Bias Shoigig Kemezid, as we learned in two dafim ago, so once we learned that Bias Shoigig Kemezid, when it comes to Yibum, is all the same, so Yibum happened. Yibum is an act of Nesuyin. So who cares if she was not engaged or not married yet to the first husband? She's married to the second husband. Shmuel says no. Ki Rabbi Rachmana. When the Torah included the Chiddush that even a weak bia does yibum, that's only lo oikme b'makim bal. That's to make the new husband, Shimon, just like the old husband. But la alume mi bal. But he should be even more connected. She was only engaged. She was midrabanan asr to have truma. Now that she should be better than the first husband, lo is this not. And now the Gemara says va'az the Shmuel taimei stronger. And Shmuel is consistent, as we know that Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, that Kol Shahabal Michael, that whenever her first marriage was one, in which because of her husband she was allowed to eat Truma, and as we said before, that is that they not only had Kiddushin together, but they had Nesuyin together, then Yavam Michael. That's Shmuel. Regardless, weak bia, not weak bia, but v'chol she'ein habal ma'echol. If her marriage to the first husband wasn't yet consummated, it was only erusin, and therefore midrabanan she was not allowed to eat truma. Yavam, if the yavam does a weak bia, then einoi ma'echol. Okay, that's Rav and that's Shmuel. Like 15 lines from Daf Nun Vav on the top, Meisvei. It says in a Brayso, Bas Yisrael pikachas, shenes arso likoin pikeach. The word pikeach means smart. Kulano chachamim, kulano pikchim. Pikachas means, pikeach in this context means the following. That when it comes to marriage, both erusin and nesuyin, both erusin and nesuyin, both steps of marriage, you need to have the da'as, you need to have the willingness, the understanding of what is happening, both between the man and the woman. As we mentioned many times, that from Torah law, this is in contrast, different than a divorce, in which by a divorce you don't need the woman's consent. You don't need her participation that went up until the Chedem, the Rabbeinu Gershon, in which he said that they're also, he and she both have to be in it, they have to be desiring to do it, etc. Now, what were to happen if when a man got engaged to his wife, the first step of marriage, then Kiddushin, both of them were pikachas, that means they were mentally competent. However, before he did the act of marriage, he became deaf mute. A deaf mute, by Torah law, is considered a mentally incompetent person, even a person that was born healthy. We mentioned this once already, we'll mention the B'kitzur again. There are many poskim that say that this din is not applicable today because of the advancements of certain technologies and certain chachmas of teaching deaf-mute people how to communicate, both in understanding and how to communicate, that they are considered intelligent people. And most poskim go by that, but that's not relevant for right now. We're speaking about, in those days, a chedesh, in the times of Chazal, were considered mentally incompetent people. So the din will be, Einoi Ocheles, even if he'll marry her, she will not be allowed to eat truma. As we explained, that midrabanan, truma can only be eaten by a woman after she's married to her husband. She's not married to her husband, because when he married her, she wasn't fully there. He wasn't fully there because.
Allowed to marry him? I mean, that's a lot.
Interesting. You're allowed to be together.
can't be with anyone else.
And she cannot be with everyone else. Very good point. No, it's something it does. Let's move on. Mace. Now what happens if now the husband dies? And look at this mazel. And his brother Shimon is also deaf mute. And yavam cheresh. So look at the interesting din. It says in the Braisa. And he does yibum. Here, oichelis, now she can eat. And the Braisa says, ubezu, and this will be an interesting case, that yafa, koyach hayavam, koyach habal. That the yavam, his act of cohabitation, has more power than the husband. Which that can make sense. Because think about Bechlal. When it comes to a marriage, you have to do marriage, l'shem marriage.
And Yibum, it's always
And yibum, like we learned in our Mishnah, shoygig, oines, it's still considered a yibum. Now this Braisa is beautifully like Rav. Mamish, that's exactly what Rav was saying. Bishloim el Rav Nicha. Mamish, perfect. There's a case where she was only engaged, clear. And then she died, she became a widow from an engagement, and the husband affects yibum even without knowledge, which is very similar to the weak yibum in our Mishnah. But Mamish l'shmuel kash. So therefore Shmuel has to make an emendation. Amending a Braisa is certainly not ideal. It's a doichik, but he has no other way out. Amalach Shmuel, Ika, Amalach Shmuel, Eimahachi. Read the Braisa the following: that if the lohispik lekon sachin is charish, if they were not married yet and he became a deaf mute, then and the brother, the yavam, is a deaf mute, then the Braisa actually says that einoi oichelos betruma, because it's a weak bia. However, if the original brother, before he became mentally incompetent, he married her, and then he became deaf mute, and then he dies, right? Oichelo, she eats, and then he died, and she falls into a yavam who's a cheresh, and he does yibum, then she vaited oichelos. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, how is she better than him? How does the Braisa end? Umay bezu, that yafa koyach hayavam, it still makes sense. Because the original husband, had he done nisuyin when he was already a cheresh, then she would not be allowed to eat truma. But they got married when he was a pikeach. The yavam lechatchila, if he's taking over a full-fledged marriage, then he can lechatchila do yibum when he's a cheresh. The ilu baal, if he was a cheresh meikara, then lo yerchelas. But by a yavam a cheresh meikara. Achla, when achla, if there was a full marriage. That's the first version of what was Rav and Shmuel. It limited Shmuel's din extensively. Shmuel only said she doesn't eat truma if she was a yevama from a erusin. Ikada Amri, a whole different machlokes. The opposite. That if the first couple, let's go back, there's a Reuven and his wife, Yeiro. Reuven marries Rachel. And he only got engaged to her. And he dies. Even though they were never married yet, there's a mitzvah of yibum. Now we're speaking about the brother, the yavam, who's doing a weak yibum with her. Weak would mean, for example, that when he's with her, he doesn't even know it's her. He thinks he's with someone else. So the Mishnah says, it affects marriage nonetheless. Says Shmuel, it affects marriage not for everything. If he is a kohen and she's not from a family of kahanim, such a relation will not allow her to eat truma. So if they were only engaged, the first couple, divrei hakol lo yoichlo, even Rav agrees. Now we're going to have to farem for the Braisa, even according to Rav. The halo yoichlo b'chaye baal, because she was not allowed to eat when her husband was alive. As we said that midrabanan, by erusin, a woman cannot eat truma yet. Ki pligi fakert, where the Rav and Shmuel argue min hanesuyin, that Rav says oicheles, that if Reuven married Rachel, now they're married, that means she already ate truma. Even midrabanan, and now Reuven dies, and now Shimon has a weak yibum with her. Rav says still she goes back to eating truma, because since the ha'hava achlis meikara, she was eating before. It's as if Rav was holding that yibum is not a new marriage. Yibum is like a continuation of the old marriage, and Shmuel seems to be holding more that yibum is like a new marriage. Shmuel Amar Eino Yerchela, she cannot eat. Why? Ki Rabbi Rachmana Bia Shoygig Kemezid. Like we learned in 2 dafim ago, that even a weak bia is considered yibum. That's only, like we said, Ledvarim Ho'amurim B'Parasha. For the dinim of Yerusha, Lepeteres Hayibum, a get without Chalitza, V'chulei. Avaloi L'koil Mid, but for everything else, for Trumanat. And V'ha'amar Shmuel, And then Shmuel kol shabal Michael yavam Michael. Shmuel seemingly was more lenient. He said whenever the husband was enabling her to eat, that means there was nesuyin. So then yibum l'chayda should also enable her. And no. Ema say like this, kol bia, any type of bia, shahabal Michael ba. When it comes to marriage, like we just said before, a normal marriage needs to have consent. When it comes to nesuyin, the man and the woman who are together for the first time have to know that they are with each other. L'shem nesuyin, not l'shem znus. So any type of bia which affects a marriage, such a bia yava Michael loisa, fakert. But v'chol bia she'ein abal Michael ba, even if she was married to the first husband, ein hayava Michael ba. Okay, all this works out in Shmuel. The problem will be the Braisa. Now this Braisa will be a kasha even to Rav, and the Gemara is going to give the teretz that we gave to Shmuel. The Gemara is going to give that teretz to Rav, but to Shmuel, as we'll see, will be very difficult. Meisvei asked the Gemara, it says in the Braisa that Bas Yisrael pikachas, that if you had a mentally competent woman that is from a non-Kohen house, that she got engaged to a Kohen who was mentally competent, again, midoraisa, she can already eat truma. Midorabanan, she can't yet. But the loyhispik l'kohen sa'achan is charesh, one of them became deaf mute, and now that marriage is also not considered a full-fledged marriage. Even if they get married, einoi oicheles, she doesn't eat truma. And if now mace, and now she falls into a yavam, and the yavam is also a deaf mute, oicheles, that goes even against Rav. And again, ubezu yafa koich yav mikoich habal. So the Gemara says like this: Bishleim el Rav. Mele Rav here can be metaretz kedataretz mikara. We can answer the Braisa by amending it, by saying no. That we're speaking about a case where not only was she engaged, but she got married, the first marriage, before the husband became deaf mute. There, they're eating truma. Now the husband dies. Now the Yavam is doing a weak yibum. Rav is the one that says here, since originally she was able to eat, here she can eat. And that's the meaning of Zu Yafa Kaycha Yavam Meikara. But El Shmuel, there's no answer now. Kasha. Now the question is, as we said many times, that whenever you refute someone, you say the word tiyufta. The word kasha means that there's an answer. But there's mamash no answer here. So the Rishonim point out a good rule to know. Whenever you start amending a Braisa, what does that really mean? Everything was learned by heart then. That means if the Gemara already acknowledged, even according to Rav, that the wordings that you had, the words of the Braisa that you have were not correct, you have to start playing around with it, it automatically makes that Braisa not such a authoritative Braisa. You're passing the Braisa. We had that before. A weak Braisa. So therefore, maybe the whole Braisa was a mistake. Okay, moving on.
So now we have a Mishnah of Braisa, like a marriage of the Hebrew.
Tan Rabbanan. We learned in a Braisa. Bas Yisrael pikachas, if you had a mentally healthy Jewish woman from a non-Kohen family, shenas arsal l'kohen pikech, that got engaged and there was a proper engagement, v'lo hispik l'konsa, and before they got married, before they did nesuyin, achenas charesh, he became deaf mute. He became mentally, halachically incompetent. So the din is, einoi oicheles, she's not allowed to eat truma. We explained that before, that's midrabanan. Because midrabanan, midoiraisa, an engaged wife could eat truma. She cannot eat midrabanan, and that bia, being that it's done by nesuyin without his full being there, doesn't affect a full-fledged nesuyin to enable her to eat truma. However, look at the chiddush here. If noilad bain, but if she gave birth to a son, and as Rashi brings the pasuk, it says v'yilid beisay heim yoichlu b'lachmai. So we don't say the word yoichlu. Not only will the sons of the Kohen eat, but you read the words ya'achilu, that because of the son allows someone else to eat. Who does the son allow to eat? The mom. Oicheles. However, any child. However, meis habein. But what happens if the son dies? So Rab Nassan says she still continues to eat. All this makes a lot of sense. Don't forget that midoy raisa, a woman can eat after Edison, and the Edison was a kosher Edison. However, the Chachamim say ein oichelos. My time of the Rab Nassan, the son died. So Rabbi says because she already ate. That hoyel shekafar achola, since she already ate, when she started eating, you don't take it away from her. So the Gemara counters, Amalei Abaye, what kind of logic is that? Forget about a case, pikech, chedesh, a normal marriage. A Bas Yisrael marries a Kohen. If they're divorced, or if he dies, what's the din? No more? Why don't we say over there, 1 second, while they were married, she ate. She already ate. Let her continue to eat. Just because you ate once doesn't mean that you can forever eat. A normal marriage, there's no kids yet. When she's married, she's eating. And then then he dies. So Teichel, will we say that she's allowed to continue eating even without children because shekvar achala? We don't say that. Elakiv and Demis, since he died, Pakalei Kedushasei Mina, the Kedusha that she had because she was married to him, left her. So here also, she was only allowed to eat because of her son. Ekiv Demis lay, Pakal Kedushasei Mina. Ella, Rabbi Yosef says like this, that the reason for Rab Nassan is a big chiddush, because he holds that Nesuyei Chedesh Machilin Betruma. That once she's married, she's allowed to eat truma. Why is that? Think about it. Midai Raisa, an engaged wife can eat truma. Why did the Chachamim say that an engaged wife cannot eat truma? We gave 2 reasons. First of all, she's in the house of her family, of her father's home, and they're Yisraelim. If she'll have the food, she might give it to them. That is not relevant by a Nesuya Chedesh. It's not a full-fledged Nesuyan, but she's living with her husband. They're living as husband and wife. She's not in the house of her father. And for the other reason of Simpoin, if he would have claimed that a mekachtos because she has a mum, he would have said it right after he had Nesuin with her. So even though that halachically doesn't affect a full-fledged marriage, but he was with her, and he's not complaining of her blemish, so there is no mekachtos. So the reasons that were given for the chachamim to disallow her eating truma is not shaykh anymore when there's nesuyin, even nesuyin chedesh. That's great.
But if it's a cheresh,
that's a question.
Yeah, if it's a cheresh, can he claim mekachtos?
No. Well, don't forget, people, let me answer you by saying that a chedesh is not so mentally incompetent.
Okay, so he's not a short.
Now, 1 second. So just to clarify, if she's engaged to a cheresh, she cannot eat.
For sure, not midrabanan.
Engaged to, but if she marries him, she's still.
Rab Nassan machlekes. Now we're making.
If she has a kid, then she can eat.
That for sure, according to everyone.
Then if there's no more kid, the question is, can she still eat?
Correct. So now the Gemara says that if Rab Nassan's din is based on the fact that Nesuyei Chedesh allows her to eat, what does a kid have to do with anything? It has nothing to do with that. The Chachamim, logically, you're not going to debate with Rab Nassan. Rab Nassan is right with Svara, that the reasons to make the Isur is not shaykh by Nesuyin. But they say that we make a Gezerah, Nesuyin Oto Eirusin. But the Gemara says, the whole Bain is irrelevant. So the Gemara says, you're right. All of that is only according to the Chachamim. According to Rab Nassan, Nesuyin she can eat. Not because the son wants... Without a kid. And with the kid and died, it's all the same thing. The problem doesn't... So the whole Braisa that's mentioning the kid is only mentioning it according to the Chachamim. The Lifleik Rab Nassan Olayo Bereisha. So why is it when the Braisa began saying that Noilad Lo Bein Oicheles, the Rab Nassan dear should have said right away, even without a Bein. So the Gemara answers something which is rare, that Shavek Lahur Rabbanan Ad Messiah Mosayu, that Rab Nassan allowed Rab Nassan to speak his whole opinion out. The Rab Nassan allowed the Chachamim to speak. Now the whole ratio is the Chachamim. And then V'hadr Pali Golei, and then he argues with the Chachamim. The Gemara says it doesn't fit into the words of the Brais. Ihachi Litani Meis Habein Eino Yecheles, Rab Nassan Amar Yecheles. Let's look at the Brais. If the whole ratio is the Chachamim, so the ratio is like this, that if they were engaged, and before he got married, he became deaf mute, Eino Yecheles. True. Noil Bein Yecheles, according to the Chachamim. Because according to the Chachamim, marriage itself, it won't be enough. Meis Habein, all the Chachamim, Eino Yecheles. And then Rab Nassan should have said his piece, that she can eat the whole time. The fact that Meis Habein, first we quote Rab Nassan and then the Chachamim, that implies that the nature was according to everyone. Kasha. Back at the Gemara. Right there, last line.
If the child grows up and is not samuch, will she stop eating?
I think it makes no difference.
As long as she has a child.
Yep.
Does it matter if the kid comes to cheresh or
No, doesn't matter. Let's go weiter. So we learned, going back to the din of ha'ara'ah, that whenever there's an act of cohabitation, whether it is an act of cohabitation that's affecting a marriage or affecting yibum, or whenever a person, God forbid, is violating and having a non-kosher relationship, which is defined by having an act of cohabitation. So we said, going into the technical details, that ha'ara'ah, which means the beginning of the act, is already considered the act. So Rav Amram said the following, that Ha Milsa Amalan Rav Sheshes once made a statement. And no one knew where he got that statement from. We'll say the statement in a moment. And V'an harinu le'einin mimas nissen. And our eyes became enlightened when we read our Mishnah. What was the statement which we didn't know where he got it from? And it is our Mishnah. That Rav Sheshes said, Eishes Yisrael Shenenso. Tragic cases. If a woman gets raped, that means if she has a relation with another man, very unlike her choosing willingly, God forbid, to have an affair with another man. When a married woman has a relationship willingly with another man, so not only will she never be allowed to ever be with him again, asr lebayil, she's also asr lebal. Which is why theoretically, if a woman has an affair, the husband has to divorce her. If he knows that she had a relation willingly with another man, he cannot be with her. But that's only if she chose to have that relation. But if, God forbid, a woman is raped, then if she's not married to a kohen, he can be with her. It was against her will. But by a kohen, it's different. By a kohen, we'll see soon the pasuk for that even if, God forbid, she was raped, the fact that she was with another man, her husband can no longer be with her. Now, came along, that's according to everyone, that's learned from Sukkah. The question is like this: if a woman is married to a Yisrael and she's raped, this does not affect her marriage. She's married to a Yisrael. What were to happen if her husband later divorces her, or if her husband dies? Can she marry a kohen? Rav Sheshes says she cannot marry a kohen because she was a woman that was with another man, and when it comes to a kohen, any relation with another man prohibits her to a kohen. Now that was a chiddush, and no one knew where he got it from. Rav Sheshes says, Eishes Yisrael Shenensa, even though she was raped when she was married to her Yisrael husband, and even though she's mutar l'bayla, nevertheless, forever this woman will be psula l'kahuna. Now if she's married to her husband, who cares? That means that if she's not married to her husband later, she cannot marry her husband. You're very good correction. If she's divorced from her husband, she anyways cannot marry a kohen. But if she becomes widow, she can marry a kohen. And now, where did he get it from? So the Gemara says, v'tana tuna. That's our Mishnah. Why does it say in our Mishnah? When it says in our Mishnah, v'chein, the Mishnah began teaching you a few dinim. The Mishnah taught you the din that having a weak biyah goes into effect. The Mishnah taught you that only ha'ara'ah, only the beginning of the act is considered an act. And then the Mishnah says, v'chein, that these rules, we'll see what the v'chein goes to, on all of the arayas amuras b'Torah. All of the arayas also refers to an eishes ish. That's considered an act of cohabitation, and the Mishnah adds the words, oy psulais, that disqualifies her. And my v'chein. My love does not the words of a chein, that any act that was mentioned in the Mishnah, including shoygig, mezid, and oines, ratzin, oines on her part, that even over there she becomes asur psala. What does psala mean? The word pasal means that word is only used vis-a-vis a woman with a kohen. So that's what the Mishnah is telling you, which is great. So that's a proof to Rav Sheshes. So the Gemara says, the Gemara is not going to disagree with the halacha of Rav Sheshes. I think Rav Sheshes is actually, that's the halacha. All the Gemara is going to challenge is that we still do not know where did Rav Sheshes get this din from, not from our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah lav dafka meant v'chein to this case as well. That loi, my v'chein, what does the v'chein refer to? Perhaps only to ha'ara'ah. In other words, that when it comes to all of the other isurei arayos, even ha'ara also is considered an act of biyah. 1 second. So the Gemara says, ha'ara deman. Where is the principal law, and what's the secondary law? The Mishnah began with the laws of Yibum. If v'chein is referring to ha'ara, the Mishnah is telling you that I want you to know that when it comes to Yibum, even only ha'ara is called Yibum. And likewise by all the other arayos. How ironic. We learned before.
The other way around.
The other way around. Tudafago, that the whole din of ha'ara is learned from nida, or in other isur erva, we learn yibum from arayas. Ha'ara, the man, ilema da arayas, lememra da arayas, alfinin mi yevama, v'chein. Like, who's the main, who's the secondary? Adarabba, the yevama is learned from arayas. The wordings in the Mishnah, the order in the Mishnah would not have been correct if v'chein refers to the din of ha'ara. Because the ikir ha'ara, ba'ara is ksiv. Ella answers the Gemara, my v'chein. No, v'chein goes to another din. The din of shaloi kedarka. That even a bia shaloi kedarka is called yibum, and v'chein by arayis. So again, the Gemara says that's not true. He says, v'chein shaloi kedarka da arayis. Adarabba. How do we know that a bia shaloi kedarka is called bia? We know it because when it comes to the isur arayis, when the Torah is prohibiting men having relations with many women, that one cannot have a relation with the Torah uses the words that one cannot have mishkevei isha. Mishkevei means one cannot have acts of cohabitations in the plural. And we're speaking about one woman and one man that cannot have acts of cohabitations. So that from there we learn that both kedarka and shaloi kedarka are called acts of bia. And that is also by arayas. So the order of a chen is wrong. So again, this is not a question against Rav Sheshes. It's just pointing out that our Mishnah is not a proof to Rav Sheshes. But Elamai, one second, but it has to go to the din of Oines. No. My v'chein ashaloi kedarka dechayav elavim. The din that bia shaloi kedarka is also a violation, even where the act of the relation is not an act of an erva, but there's only a chi of love. It says lo yavi mamzer b'kahal Hashem. So if either the man or a woman are a mamzer or a mamzeres, you cannot marry a mamzer or a mamzeres if the other one is a proper Yisraelite. That's a isur love. How do we know of a deer? That's not the source for bia shaloi kedarka. So our Mishnah is telling you that just like by yibum, if one yavam did a bia shaloi kedarka with one's yavama, they become married. V'chein by chayuv elavim. That is perhaps the meaning of the Mishnah. And Rav Sheshes cannot know for sure that it's referring to the din of oines, that oines also affects psala, which it will not. Well, it's not a proof. And period. And we leave it at that. Omar Rava says, Rava, that you should know Eishes Kayin, Shenensa, and her husband, after, God forbid, one's wife was raped, is going to have a relation with her. So what isur is that? Like, where do we know it from? So Rava says, Loika Aleha Mishum Zaina.
She's allowed?
Which is a lav. Yeah. One of the women that a kohen cannot marry is a zaina. It's interesting that just to know the language, that even though people normally use the word zaina for a harlot, for a woman who's mafked herself, but in the Torah context, zaina refers to a woman that had one relation with a man normally with whom she would not be allowed to marry. So if a single woman and a single man, both Jews, had a relation together, she will not become a zaina. If God forbid, if a woman is having many relations with many different men, she's not a zaina.
But the act will be called.
That's something else. But she will not become a zaina. A zaina woman, if she'll have one relation with a man with whom she can never marry. She has one relation with a guy, she becomes a zaina. If, in this case, if she's a married woman, another man had a relation with her, even though it was against her will, she was raped, since that relation is an isur erva, she becomes a zaina, and on that you get malchus. So the Gemara asks, there's another pasuk for that. Mishum zaina does she only get malchus because she's called a zaina? And mishum tumaloi, there's a pasuk, we learned that way in the beginning of Masechtas Eruvin, in which it says that if a man divorces his wife, and then she marries another man, and the other man dies or the other man divorces her, so lo yuchal baila harashayna asher shilcha, the first husband that sent her away, he's not allowed to remarry her. And then the pasuk says achrei asher hu tama'a, because she became tamei. And the Gemara asks, if a man divorces his wife, kedasu kedin, and she marries a second husband, kedasu kedin, and they were together, their living together is not called an act of tuma. So the whole seif of the pasuk, which says achrei asher hu, Well, both. It's not, there's no tumah, no zanus. They were married. So Taka, the first husband, cannot marry her back. There's no question about it. But being that the Torah uses the words achri yasheru tamah, it's hinting to another case. What is the other case? The other case is that when a woman is married to her husband, if she willingly, this is a Eshes Yisrael, if she has a relation with another man, then she's not allowed to be with her husband. Achri yasheru tamah. She's asura labal. If a woman became tamad in the marriage, she cannot have a relation with her husband. In the parsha of Saita, where the man who's married to his wife warns his wife not to be with another man, no one knows what really happened. So the Torah says that if she taka slept with the other man, she can't be with her husband because she became tamad to him. So from there we learn that achri yasheru tamah, that the first husband cannot be with her, and this din of achri yasheru tamah, when it comes to an Eshes Yisrael, refers to a woman who had a willing act of relation with another man. But as we'll see soon, in the parsha of Sotah, there is a hint that there is one case that even if it was unwilling, she's also tameh, and that goes to a Eshes Kayin, and that's a lav. Let's go back. It says that lo yuchal ba'alo harishayna lekachas, because there's a isur tumah, and that tumah also refers to a married woman, to a kohen, who even was only raped, in other words, without willingness, she had a relation with another man. There's a lav of, you can't be with her. So the Gemara says, you're right. Eima af mishum zayna, that there's taka tu isurim. There's a lav of layuchal ba'ilo harishain, lavi lekachla, referring to the tumah that a Eshes kohen had, even though she was only raped, and also she becomes a zayna. And that's what Rava meant. Rava meant that if the kohen stays with his wife every time he lives with her, he's violating two isurei lav. Lav she'ein by kares, but for each act of cohabitation, there's going to be two chiyuvim malchus.
One which is
Zoina, and one is called Tuma.
And we don't say Tuma about any of the other arayos?
If I'm not mistaken, by the other arayos where there's an isur kares, whenever there's an isur kares, there's a common layman that Rabbi minay. Right.
So the isur of a kohen staying married to his wife that was raped is worse than a kohen who divorced his wife, she married someone else.
Very good.
That guy died and she came back.
Correct. Very good. Well said. Masav Rab Zera. Now let's go back. Let's go to the Saita. This is important psukim to know. How do you know that a kohen cannot marry his wife that it was raped? So go back to Saita. By Saita it says that if the woman was not coerced to be with the other man, by Eshes Yisrael, willingly she had a relation, he cannot be with her. It says, V'hi loy nispasa, she was not coerced. From there we learn that if she was coerced, Eshes Yisrael, he could be with her. Asura, which from there we learn, ha nispasa, that if a married woman was coerced, then she's moteres. However, there's an extra word in that parsha site that says V'hi loy nispasa. We're speaking about her. So what do we learn from the extra word he that was unneeded? That there is some cases, say she, Eshes Yisrael, there, if she was not coerced, she's mutter. But there is another woman, an Eshes Kayin, even if it was nispasa, she's still asura. It's called Tuma. And once there's Tuma, it says, Lo yuchal ba'alo rishayna, to be with his wife, achri yasheru tamah. If it's called an act of Tuma, then the Kayin cannot be with her. V'yeshloch acheres, there is another wife that sha'af al pishin is pasa asura, and ve'ezuzu eshes kohen. So the Gemara counters. No such a thing. It's like a Jew saying, "I'm giving up being a Jew and let me be Mechal Shabbos." Can't. You're a kohen. The fact that al pidin, if a kohen marries a gerusha while he's married to her, he becomes a cholol. Okay, that's because he's doing something against what Hashem said. But in reverse, if he divorces her, which he has to divorce her, then he goes back to being a kohen according to what's opinion. He becomes then a cholol. But it's not that.
Is he violating the law the entire time?
Of course. It's either by the marriage or every time he has a relation or as long as he's married. But I'm giving it up. Don't you think?
And the kids are?
The kids are permanently chalalim. But they're kahanim mecholalim, they're not the Yisraelim. But now the Gemara asks a question, 1 second.
Is this called pago or paso?
Called chalal. Now, 1 second. The Gemara asks, how can Rava say that you get malchus? We have a rule that any negative prohibition that is not explicitly written in the Torah, Hashem says something in a positive form. And implicit from a mitzvahs asay, we learn a lav, but the severity of the lav is not more than an asay. Just like there's no floggings for a violation of an asay. There is no flogging when someone violates a lav that comes from an asay. Here, the negative l'chayt is being learned from what? That the hiloinus pasuk. The pasuk is speaking about the positive case. In other words, if she is not coerced, then she cannot be with her. If she is coerced, then she could be with her husband. Elamah, we learn from here, he, but not Eishes Kayin. But it's considered the lav haba michlal asay. So why is there malchus? And why are you saying that the Rava says that she's chayv malchus twice? So Amar Rabba says a very good answer. Really, a woman, a Eishes Kayin, who was raped, but she's a married woman, that means she had a relation with another man, she's called a zayna. The fact that if it was done against the will, she's not considered a zayna, that's a chiddush that the Torah needed to teach you. That was taught in the Parsha of Saita from the words Vihi Loinus Pasa, that teaches you the opposite, that an Eishes Yisrael who was coerced in a relationship, she's not called a zayna. But being that exception doesn't go to a kohen, so a kohen's wife is considered a zayna, there's a lav of znus over here, because she's called a zayna. Because she was not excluded from Vihi Loinus Pasa. Let's go over here. It's the same thing as far as the issur of the husband being with her. That really a kohen cannot be with her because there's a lav. Don't be with the zayna. Elama kishaparat lucha akasav gabal Eishes Yisrael Vihi Loinus Pasa. And from there we imply that only if she was not coerced asura, but if she was nispasa, if she was coerced, if she was raped, then muteres. And we had the extra word vihi, and the word he comes to take out the Eishes Kayin. So Eishes Kayin remains the way she was before, that there's an Isur lav. So it's not pshat, it's a lav haba mechlal asay. It remains in the original lav. And therefore, again, according to most people who learn the first version of Rava, she's going to be like a af mishum zayna. There's another version, ve'ika da amri, that Rabba says.
That means loka twice?
It's Rabba. Yes. And ve'ika da amri, that she's not like it twice. That Eishes Kohen shenenso, that if a woman, a wife of a Kohen, God forbid, is raped, her husband no longer can be with her. If her husband was with her, then you get malchus for one lav from Tuma. She's not called a zayna. But being that she was defiled, and there's a lav, like the pasuk says in the parsha again of don't remarry your original wife. But that parsha is also referring to a woman that had a relation with another man in their marriage. Achri asher hu tama'a, and Tuma by a Eishes Kayin means even an act of rape. And for that you get malchus. In other words, what Rabba said was not zoyna and tuma, but mishum tuma in mishum zoyna loy. In other words, alma ba'aynes loy karina ba'zoyna. Masiv Rab Zera, and it says in the portion of Saita, vihi loy nispasa, that she was not coerced. And it is from here that we learn that if she was coerced, that means a normal Eishes Yisrael, then she could be with her husband. But there's an extra word he, and from the word he we learn v'yesh loch acheres she'af al pi shenespas asura ve'ezuzu Eishes Kayin. And if that's the case, the lav haba michlal asay should only be an asay l'chayda, being that we learn from the v'hi loy nespasa ha-nespasa muteres, but not the Eishes Kayin. All that is called the lav haba michlal asay. So from here we learn that an Eishes Kayin that was raped cannot be with her husband. Why would it be malchus? There should not be malchus, even not for tuma, because that's a lav haba michlal asay. And on this Rabba answered, that's the bacha emendation. Nothing is Rabba here, that hakol lohoyu b'chlal achri asheru tamah, that in the pasuk that speaks about lo yuchal balo harishon, that's a lav, that's not a lav haba michlal asay. And the pasuk says that a man cannot be with his wife if she became defiled. Now, a woman that was raped is not called defiled if she's an Eishes Yisrael. But whoever was not included in that exception reverts to the original understanding that if there was an act of tumah in marriage with another man, period, you can't be with your husband. That is only for an Eishes Yisrael. But Mechlal the Eishes Kohen, she's not given the exemption of she was not coerced. We don't care. And therefore what? Therefore she's called a woman who had an act of Tumah. And the Torah says, Lo yuchal ba'al harishayna, which means that the Kohen is not allowed to marry her. That is a very challenging dinim. People have a hard time understanding it. But no, how can such a thing happen? How can God allow it to happen? That's another question. But the consequence of such an act will be that the husband has to divorce her. Just to point out, we're not giving an halacha class when such a thing, God forbid, were to happen. There's a broader question here, which has a lot of halachic implications, and that is, let's speak about an Eishes Yisrael. If she was with another man willingly, v'hi loy nispasa, the whole parsha of V'saita, then the Torah says that she cannot be with her husband. Right? Asura l'boyel v'asura l'bal. If a woman tells her husband that I had an affair, and I had so it's good to know, again, we're not speaking halacha l'maisa, but to understand that there are times, and perhaps in the majority of times, that we do not believe her. How do we know? There has to be Adam. And there's reasons for one not to believe her, and those reasons would be that the words of the Gemara is Shema Yitna Eineha Ba'acher, that she might want to marry another man. And if a woman wants to marry another man, one of the ways to get out of a marriage is to tell her husband, I had an affair with another man. Or to tell him that something happened to her which would make her original husband want to divorce her. Instead of her being honest and saying, I just don't want to be married with you. But she's trying to get out of the marriage. And therefore she has no nemanus. Now there's a lot of exceptions to that. There are certain times that halachically you don't force the husband to divorce her. But if the husband knows that it's true, a husband can feel, at least 99% of the cases, he knows that his wife was with another man. Whenever these things, God forbid, happen, one should ask a Rav. But coming back over here, the halacha remains not only that if, God forbid, an Eishes Kohen was raped, she becomes usher to her husband, but more than that, the halacha is like Rab Sheshes, which was the beginning of this whole sugya, that if a woman that's married to a Yisrael is raped, and she's allowed to remain to be with her husband, if later she becomes widowed, being that she was once a woman that in marriage was with another man, even though it was against the will, she can never get married to a Kohen. If she gets married to a Kohen, here we have the two versions of what Rabbah said. Either there's two Isurei Lavin, Zoina Tuma, or only Isur Tuma, but there's for sure an Isur, and we'll stop over here, and the Mitzvah Shem will continue tomorrow.